This program is funded in part by grants from the state humanities organizations in Nebraska, Iowa, and North Dakota, by the Central Educational Network, and by Nebraskans for Public Television.
Okay, the reason that the farm question and the agriculture crisis is so important is because what's wrong with agriculture is what's wrong with this country.
Fighting against foreclosure.
I'd like to tell the business people, especially of this town and of other little towns, that they are not going to stay alive if they keep eliminating farmers. Because for every 7 farmers eliminated, 1 business goes down the tube. And for every farm eliminated, we lose 7 jobs in our economy. This is not a farm issue. The other aspect of this that's so important is that we're producing one of the 3 essentials of life, and that's food. At some point in this crisis, we have to make the stand and we have to stop these sales.
We're going to have a sale here today. As I said, this is an order by District Court of Grand County.
October 1983 in Nicodemus, Kansas. Angry farmers gathered to protest a foreclosure. It was a familiar story. Times were bad and another farmer couldn't make his mortgage payments. A lender who wanted his money now. The sheriff to sell the farm. The other farmers, bitter and frightened that they might be next. Deputies sent to make sure the auction took place. It's happened many times before on the plains.
Whereas Stockton Production Print Association on July 14, 1983 obtained judgment herein against Theodore B. Bates and Ava L. Bates.
I'm Richard Reeves. This program is about farm protest in the Middle West and on the Great Plains. On the plains, farmers have always lived miles apart from each other. That's how they got their reputation for rugged individualism. But for more than 100 years, time and time again, they have come together. They've organized themselves in protest against low crop prices, greedy railroads, cruel bankers, corrupt politicians. Those uprisings have been small American revolutions involving hundreds of thousands of men and women. We'll begin with the Grange movement of the 1870s. Within 10 years, the Grangers had faded, but they were replaced in the 1880s by the Farmers Alliance. The Alliance merged into the People's Party in the 1890s, the Populists. They elected governors and senators across the Midwest. In 1915, the Nonpartisan League of North Dakota. It was about as close as America ever came to experimenting with socialism. In the 1930s, the Farmers Holiday Association. They were revolts. That word seems awfully far away these days, but there are many similarities between those movements and the protests of farmers today. In big ways, American farmers have had the same problems for more than a century.
Every quarter of land practically in this part of the country had a farm family on it in the 1880s. And since that time, we've had attrition out of agriculture in this part of the country. Of course, the most attrition comes at those times when there's the most economic problems.
Across the spectrum in agriculture, the people that have capitalized, have bought land, have bought machinery, have bought livestock on borrowed money are really in trouble.
Right now we're in the 4th consecutive year of increasing costs and lower prices. Farmers have never been in such a bad debt situation as they are today.
When conditions beyond farmers' control, conditions which farmers are not responsible for, when those conditions force people out of agriculture, then we think that that should be stopped.
We have gone through cycles historically of prosperity and the demise then of family farming. But I think that the way society is economically structured right now in terms of corporate control and concentration of wealth, for example, that this may be in fact the last opportunity we have in our lifetimes to save family farm agriculture in this country.
And we have in America a real conspiracy not to tell the language of the radical movement or the democratic or the progressive movement. And it's really, I call it that our culture dismembers, and we have to remember. You don't have any future if you don't have any past. I mean, the people who don't know about the farm movements and the heroism of those people and their intelligence and their creative social responsibility, how can they feel that they have any responsibility in the future?
Farmers' movements and the populism that came out of them have roots that go deep into American history. Before the Revolution, a young Virginian, Thomas Jefferson, saw America as a nation of yeoman farmers. Those thoughts would make him the spiritual father of American agrarian protest.
Jefferson thought that the small farm and every man on his farm and every man free of a mortgage and producing was the basis of democratic life, and probably is.
The idea that Thomas Jefferson had, that you were going to maintain democracy by the small shop owner, the worker, the man on the land. They took an interest in things, and that's your democracy was based on that, is against the feudal lords, understand. Well, there's such a thing as corporate feudal lords, you know.
Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, if ever he had a chosen people, whose breasts he has made his peculiar deposit for substantial and genuine virtue. It is the focus in which he keeps alive that sacred fire, which otherwise might escape from the face of the earth. Corruption of morals in a mass of cultivators is a phenomenon of which no age nor nation has furnished an example.
Those words are from Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia. That could be the anthem of American agrarian protest. Jefferson, though, was doing more than romanticizing the small farmers. He was making a policy argument. He hated cities and their mass industries. He didn't want the United States to be like Europe. But the United States was never destined to be a nation of noble small farmers. The new settlers who came on the trains across the country to the Great Plains in the 1870s, they had to be businessmen as well as farmers. A farmer needed capital. To buy a plow and to buy a horse and seed, he needed cash. And if he didn't have cash, he had to borrow it.
As a matter of fact, when the Homestead Act was passed, a lot of radicals, well, that was the first time in the whole world that you got free land, that people, ordinary people could get free land. Many people said, radicals said, well, this is utopia. You know, this means free land. And Marx said that the land will be back in the hands of the bankers in 3 or 4 years, because you go out on free land and you have to have a horse and a plow and a wife in that order, and you have to get a mortgage right away. And the bankers were waiting there to give the mortgage.
We worked through spring and winter, through summer and through fall, but the mortgage worked the hardest and the steadiest of all. It worked on nights and Sundays and worked each holiday, settled down among us, and it never went away.
But the mortgage was only the first of the farmers' financial dealings. Farming became a business because it got easier. Beginning in the 1870s, machines and horses took over work that had been done by men and oxen. A man could produce more. Now he had to sell those crops, transport them to markets. He wasn't alone so much anymore. He was in a world of middlemen, machinery salesmen, freight rates. He was borrowing more and more against bigger crops. But one bad year and the debts could wipe him out. The bank would own his land. Around that time, in 1867, the Patrons of Husbandry was formed. It was a secret society modeled after the Masons. Its purpose was to educate farmers about the new ways and to help relieve the boredom of farm life. By the 1870s, many of its members were involved in politics, and it had a new nickname, the Grange.
The early National Grange was founded pretty much and would have been a protest organization there, really. They thought the railroads were getting to the farmers and some of the big trusts and so forth.
Well, the Grange had pageants and songs and drama, plays, raising the level even of decorating your house. You know, it was a tremendous cultural movement.
It was a family operation all the way through, clear back over 100 years ago when women, which was very unusual at that time, had an equal spot in the Grange. Back in the older days, it was said that Grange conventions weren't sought by the bigger towns and convention centers because we had a reputation of going in with the 10 Commandments and a $10 bill and leaving 10 days later without breaking either. This has kind of been the philosophy of the Grange over the years, and to some extent we still have this kind of old home feeling.
We will rally round the Grange, we will rally once again, shouting the farmer's cry of freedom. We will rally to the Grange, our rights to maintain, shouting the farmer's cry of freedom. The patrons forever arrive and hurrah, down with the presses and up with our stars. We will rally to the Grange, our rights to maintain, shouting the farmer's cry of freedom.
The Grange was the idea of Oliver Hudson Kelly. He was a postal official in Washington who had been raised on a farm. After founding the Grange, he ran it from his home in Elk River, Minnesota. Kelly wanted to organize and educate farmers through the social events and debates sponsored by the society.
Its grand object is not only general improvement in husbandry, but to increase the general happiness, wealth, and prosperity of the country. It is founded upon the axioms that the products of the soil comprise the basis of all wealth, that individual happiness depends upon general prosperity, and that the wealth of a country depends upon the general intelligence and mental culture of the producing classes.
Depression hit the farmers after the Panic of 1873. They'd run out of credit. The Grangers had begun to organize cooperatives to buy and to sell goods, to extend credit, to avoid middlemen. The idea spread like a prairie fire. By 1876, there were 25,000 Grangers. There were more than 1 million members. Then the Grangers focused on the railroads as the farmers' problem. They felt high railroad rates were killing them. But the railroads controlled large numbers of state legislators, and that drew the Grangers into politics, even though Oliver Kelly had written a constitution mandating nonpartisanship.
What often happened at the Grange meetings was that they would have their ritualistic meeting and go through their entire ritual and have their lecture and the other things they do at the meeting. And then they would adjourn and have an anti-monopoly meeting afterwards. It was very common.
I would imagine that the Grange in its first years would have considered to have been the modern American ag movement, maybe. We were young and we were brash, and we were willing to walk over people if that seemed to fit our needs.
And it was thought by many people to be a very radical organization. It was really one of well, it was the first national farmers organization in America where farmers would come together in order to fight a monopoly. But of course, before the 1870s, there was no need to do that because there were no national corporations. There were no monopolies really to fight. They created a big furor. The political situation in the 1870s was just replete with third parties, and the Grangers were behind most of that.
When the farmer comes to town with his wagon broken down, oh, the farmer is the man that feeds them all. If you'll only look and see, I think that you'll agree that the farmer is the man that feeds them all. The farmer is the man, the farmer is the man. He lives on his credit till the fall. Then they take him by the hand and they lead him from the land. And the middleman's the one that gets it all.
Granger parties and their political allies elected officials in several states. It probably didn't hurt that the polling booths were often in local Grange halls. In 3 of those states, in Illinois and Iowa and Minnesota, Granger legislators helped write laws that regulated railroad rates. Those laws were challenged all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the justices ruled in favor of the laws. So politically, the Grange had accomplished a great deal. It helped establish the legal principle that there is such a thing as the public good, and sometimes it outweighs the rights of private property. But politics also split the Grange. Many members wanted it to stick to its nonpartisan constitution. Some Republicans, some Democrats began to go their own separate ways. At the same time, there was trouble in the co-ops. Many were beginning to fail. By 1880, the Grange was down to a membership of only 100,000.
Maybe there were a couple of other organizations came along that seemed to fit the mood of the times better, that were a little more aggressive as far as their legislative policy. The Grange has always been nonpartisan. They've tried to get along with whichever party was in power, and some say this is a disadvantage, that we really do not put it to them like some other organizations do, although the fact that we've been going for 117 years, we're not sure that that's been wrong.
The Grange never regained its early strength, but farmers knew something now. Organized, they were a political power.
I once was a tool of oppression, and green as a sucker could be, and monopolies banded together to cheat a poor bum like me, to cheat a poor bum like me, to cheat a poor bum like me, and monopolies banded together to cheat a poor bum like me.
Railroads and party bosses together did sweetly agree. They thought there would be little trouble in fooling a hayseed like me,
in fooling a hayseed like me, in fooling a hayseed like me. And they thought there would be little trouble in fooling a hayseed like me.
The Grange in many ways failed, but it was replaced by the Farmers Alliance, which was a much more openly political organization. The Grange and the Alliance shared many of the same goals, but Alliance men were more inclined to try to take over the government to win those goals. And by 1892, they had become the troops of the new People's Party. Their enemies called them the Pops, the Populists.
There were populists that throughout the country, senators, governors, county commissioners, a good many states. You know, there's quite a movement spring up mostly because of the stranglehold that the big monopolies had on agriculture. You know, they could control freight rates and interest rates. Some of these interest rates 35%, you know. And there was an agitator down in Kansas, Mary Ellen Lease, raised the cry, raise less corn and more hell, and that seemed to be the cry that took a hold, you know, throughout the country.
The great common people of this country are slaves, and monopoly is the master. Our laws are the output of a system which clothes rascals in robes and honesty in rags. We will stand by our homes and stay by our firesides by force if necessary, and we will not pay our debts to the loan shark companies until the government pays its debts to us.
Now, you read much of that in my father's paper, the Custer County Beacon. Now, the Custer County Beacon was an organ of the Populist Party in Custer County, and he was made the editor of it. It wasn't a Democratic paper. It was a populist paper.
The farmers of Custer County, Nebraska were typical plain settlers of the 1880s. They owned little but their land and their plows, mostly Republican, still loyal to Abraham Lincoln, the man who signed the Homestead Act that gave them their 160 acres. But as times got tougher, they flocked to the Farmers Alliance.
He joined the Farmers Alliance because the farmers here were in a state of depression. They had raised good crops, and they would put them on the freight trains to send away, and they would find that the freight costs superseded the price they got.
They said, well, we put in the big crop, and they borrowed money, and then, by gosh, after we get the big crop raised, why the prices are down. They couldn't understand why that the prices would have to drop just because they produced well, you know.
They couldn't get money, and the farms were being foreclosed. They became really desperate.
Things couldn't get worse, but they did. Corn sold for 43 cents a bushel in the 1870s. It went below 30 cents in the 1890s. Wheat went from $1 a bushel to 63 cents. And those were market figures. There were reports that in Kansas, farmers were getting a dime, 10 cents for a bushel of corn.
There's one story told of an alliance meeting in Kansas in a schoolhouse, and the format of that meeting was a debate. The topic of the debate was resolved that opportunities have never been better in Kansas. And in order to uphold that proposition, they found a lawyer from town to come out and argue that, in fact, things had never been better in Kansas. The opposition speaker was a farmer, one of the leaders of the local alliance, who listened carefully to everything the lawyer had to say, then got up, went over to the stove like this, and threw in another shovel full of corn, and then sat down. And without saying a word, everyone agreed that he had won the debate.
The populists didn't feel that they could get anywhere in their parties. So they organized their own. And that's what we see nowadays. When they feel they can't get where they want to in the old-time party, then they'll organize some kind of a thing called an independent party.
The Populist Party emerged very dramatically in 1890. Their favorite campaign device was a parade. All of the farmers would get together and decorate their farm wagons and parade through town. And by parading through town, they were doing two things simultaneously. One of them was that they were reinforcing each other in their commitment to the party. The other thing they were doing was showing their defiance to the merchants, the bankers, the lawyers, the railroad representatives in town. They were making it very clear to all of the townspeople that they were now uniting as farmers in support of this new political party.
My father and my grandfather, Homer Ayers, fact is, they founded the Vermilion Plain Talk, and it was a populist paper. They were fighting high rates, railroad freight rates, high interest rates, and the growth of the big monopolies that had a stranglehold, on the farmers and on the townspeople too.
They demanded such things as this. They demanded the public ownership of all the railroads and the banks and the public utilities. And surprising, and because of this sentiment among the farming people, you had the fact that in 1892, both the Democrat and Republican parties of South Dakota adopted planks in their platform calling for the public ownership of the railroads, the banks, and the public utilities, which is an indication of the socialist sentiment that existed widely among the farmers.
They believed in capitalism, in the theory of capitalism. But they wanted all of the people to have the same privilege and the same opportunities. And that is what Thomas Jefferson stood for. And in my opinion, I think that's what the populists stand for.
Ignatius Donnelly, a Grange organizer and alliance organizer, once a Republican congressman. In his library in Ninninger, Minnesota, he wrote the preamble to the classic populist document, the Omaha Platform of 1892.
We believe that the power of government, in other words, of the people, should be expanded as rapidly and as far as the good sense of an intelligent people and the teachings of experience shall justify, to the end that oppression, injustice, and poverty shall eventually cease in the land.
The populists advocated an expanded role for government, free silver coinage to inflate the currency and commodity prices, a progressive income tax, a secret ballot in all elections, direct election of U.S. senators, initiative and referendum, government programs providing credit to farmers against next year's crops, and government ownership of the telegraph, telephone, and railroad companies.
Anybody that would support that was beyond the position of being a radical. I don't know how many different names were given to those men who supported such an idea. It was considered sort of crazy.
Populists were often treated by the opposition as being eccentrics, as being a bunch of hayseed farmers, and as being anarchists or communists. It was argued by some of the existing political party leaders that no one would want to invest in a state that was run by people with ideas as outlandish as what the populists were proposing.
As I said, my dad was belonged to the Populist Party, and for instance, in the 1900 elections, when I was only 9 years old, I can recall that the feeling between the populists and the Republicans was so sharp that we kids in the town of Bristol had fist fights between each other, between the populists and the Republicans.
Custer County was one of the first of the populist successes. Many of those who belonged to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party joined the Populist Party. They ran a slate of candidates and elected every one of them.
I once was a tool of oppression, and green as a sucker could be, and monopolies banded together to cheat a poor bum like me, to cheat a poor bum like me, to cheat a poor bum like me, and monopolies banded together to cheat a poor bum like me. But now I've roused up a little, and their greed and corruption I see. And the ticket we vote next November will be made up of hayseeds like me. Will be made up of hayseeds like me. Will be made up of hayseeds like me. And the ticket we vote next November will be made up of Stacy's like me.
In July of 1892, in Omaha, the People's Party nominated James B. Weaver of Iowa for President of the United States. He received more than 1 million votes and carried 5 states. Populist governors were elected in Kansas and Nebraska and in North and South Dakota. The populists battled Republicans and Democrats in the legislatures. Literally battled. When words failed, the debate was carried on with fists and clubs and guns. Tough, dirty politics. In North Dakota, the populists passed a women's suffrage bill. It was somehow lost on the way to the governor's office to be signed. That's how the game was played in those days. But many populist ideas did become law, including government regulation of railroads and banks. The populist days of power were short, but they changed the country. America would never be the same again. They advocated a stronger role for the government in the economy and in other areas. Their ideas, absorbed and argued over the years by the Republicans and by the Democrats, are still at the very heart of the debate over what America is about. Third-party success, though, was short-lived. William Jennings Bryan of Nebraska, co-opting a lot of populist rhetoric, won the Democratic nomination for president in 1896. Then the populists had to nominate him too, but the Boy Order of the Platte led their members into the Democratic Party.
Our hero, he comes from Nebraska. He's the orator boy of the Platte. He's offering relief to the poor man. And I tell you, we're voting for that. Ah, there, stay there. Ryan's the man that will make silver free. Ah, there, stay there. We're bound to elect him, you see.
By the turn of the century, farm prices were climbing. By 1910, they were talking about the golden age of American agriculture. Successful cooperatives were formed by new organizations which still exist. The years from 1910 to 1914 are still called the parity years. The ratio of farm costs to farm prices from that time is still the basis of federal agricultural price support levels. Not all of the Plains farmers were happy, though, during the parity years. There were new farmers in North Dakota, recent arrivals from Norway. They would get off the trains at stations in small towns like this with two things: a knowledge of wheat farming and a taste for social justice. They were convinced after a while that the farmers in North Dakota were being held in bondage by the banks, by the railroads in St. Paul. The big boys from St. Paul, that's what they called them. In 1915, the farmers of North Dakota organized, and their organization, the Nonpartisan League, revolutionized the politics of that state.
About 250,000 new people came to North Dakota between 1898 and 1915, and my folks came in 1906. I was 8 years old then, so I remember the hardship that these homesteaders went through. I would say within about 5 years, I'd say half of the people left at homesteaders. They probably wouldn't have been the type of people that would have been battling like the nonpartisans did.
North Dakota probably is the most agricultural state in the Union. They weren't getting a square deal. Go way back to the turn of the century. They weren't getting a square deal because they were at the whim and caprice of the people in Minneapolis. I always talk about the Minneapolis fellows. And then they had some collusion, these Minneapolis people, with various interests in North Dakota. For example, there was a time when it was difficult to build an elevator near a railroad site. They'd have to send their grain through a particular elevator that had the blessings of the so-called big boys.
The terminal elevators operated by the major grain companies in Duluth Superior were selling far more number one grade wheat than they bought from the farmers. So in other words, at the local elevator, the farmer was getting wheat graded down, either number 2, number 3, number 4, or no grade. And when that grade got to the terminal elevator in Duluth, it magically turned into number 1 wheat.
They could just by a stroke of the pencil ruin, make number 1 wheat number 3, and seize millions of dollars just by one action. So that's what created the radical farm movement in North Dakota.
And there's substantial evidence to conclude that most of the major political decisions affecting North Dakota during its first 25 years of statehood were really made by people who lived outside North Dakota.
The state government had been controlled by what was called the Mackenzie machine. Mackenzie was a representative of the Great Northern Railroad. There was at that time no particular Democratic or Republican Party alignment. Everything in North Dakota was Republican, pretty much controlled by Mackenzie.
Well, it was said that North Dakota's real capital was Alexander Mackenzie's suite in the Merchants Hotel in St. Paul.
By 1915, North Dakota had a small socialist party. It called for a state farm aid program, and it had elected a few state and local officials. The main issue then for North Dakota farmers was to get out from under the economic control of big grain companies in St. Paul. That year, farmers traveled to Bismarck to try to pressure legislators to appropriate funds for a state-owned grain elevator. They ran into a legislator named Twitchell.
You bet, I know that story. That's when the early organizers, before there was really any organization behind it, went down to Bismarck and asked for some farm legislation.
And at a hearing, Twitchell, Leif Twitchell, his name was, told the group, he said, "This is none of your business."
He said, "You farmers, go home and slop your hogs." He said, "We'll take care of this legislation."
And they went home and organized the Nonpartisan League and took over the state government, and so they were in the grain business in the end.
So Twitchell proved to be the best organizer the Nonpartisan League ever had by making such a remark.
You told the honest farmer to go home and slop his hog. Your feet are in the sunlight, but your head is in the fog. He'll send you to oblivion and chuck you in the bog, for he'll go marching on. Marching on and on to victory. Marching on and on to victory. Marching on and on to victory. Its soul goes marching on.
Twitchell later denied he ever said it, but go home and slop the hogs galvanized North Dakota's farmers. The legislature voted down funds for the elevator, but a determined group of Socialist Party leaders and Equity Co-op board members were ready with an explosive new organization, the Nonpartisan League. Their platform provided state-owned elevators, flour mills, and packing houses, a state hail insurance program, and rural credit banks for low-interest farm loans. Within a year, 26,000 North Dakota farmers were shouting the League's slogan, "We'll stick, we'll win."
In 1915, I was only 17 years old, but I did watch this thing, and by 1918, I joined the League before I was old enough to vote.
The socialists used to go in all the farm communities, and they would go into the town and get out a leaflet and say there'll be a meeting tonight to show you what the Minneapolis Grain Exchange is doing to kill you.
But the local towns wouldn't even give them a meeting place, so they'd have to meet out in the country, you know. But they called us just about everything you can think of, Bolsheviks and communists and socialists.
All those organizers just went from village to village and educated the people. That was really the foundation of the Nonpartisan League.
They went around and got members by charging them $16. And if they had the money, they put their $16 in it. They didn't. They signed a pledge that they would pay it. Of course, everybody thought they were downright foolish, so they called him the $16 suckers. My dad always went. He always told people that he was a $16 sucker because he had paid his dues.
We had a very able man by the name of A.C. Townley. He was an organizer. He went across his state with a bunch of shiny must have been at that time, 15, 16 shiny black Fords, and won the election in this state the first year.
Arthur C. Townley was the man behind the NPL. He was a big flax farmer with big debts. When flax prices fell in 1912, he went broke, and he joined the Socialist Party as a farm organizer. It didn't take him long to figure out that farmers might go for a socialist platform, but they wouldn't go for a socialist label.
Townley was an extremely vibrant and acerbic speaker. He was the kind of guy who could stand up in those days before microphones and be heard by 2,500 people standing in a farmyard out of doors. He was the master of repartee. He was up on the platform lecturing away and giving his talk. And a farmer, got up from the audience and said, "Mr. Townley, can you tell me what it is that I get out of the Nonpartisan League? You know, I pay my $16 every 2 years. What do I get for my money?" And Townley looked at him and said, "Mr. Jones, you got the courage to stand up and ask that question." He used to say that if you put a banker, a grain trader, and a railroad corporation leader in a barrel and rolled it down the hill, you'd have a son of a bitch on top every time. And of course the audience loved that, because it was just classic caricature of their opponents.
And I remember cartoons by a man by the name of John Bear. And one of the typical cartoons was a big fellow with a chest covered with chains and medals and everything else, and a great big sparkling diamond on the left hand. He was big business. He was a Washington evil. He was the big boy from Minneapolis Grain Exchange and all that stuff. And those are the things that were taking place at that time to rouse farmers.
The Nonpartisan League boys have started out to win. The way we'll make the grafters get will be a holy sin. They dug the grave both wide and deep that we will put them in as we go marching on.
The way the farmer was depicted in Nonpartisan League cartoons was as a symbol for everything right with America. At various times, that farmer looked like Abraham Lincoln, symbolically the embodiment of all that was good and upright and true and pure with America. He was the visual image of somebody who was perfect, who was the people.
The Nonpartisan League, boys, is surely not in fun. The cry to arms is heard in every hamlet, farm, and town. The issue is preparedness, and they surely won't lay down. And soon they'll be marching to Bismarck. Hurrah, hurrah, the farmers shall be free. Hurrah, hurrah, their freedom now they see. Because the time has come when farmers all agree, and now they'll go marching to Bismarck.
In June of 1916, the NPL nominated candidates in the state's primary elections. When the rural votes were counted, the NPL had won every Republican contest and one of the Democratic contests. Their candidate for governor was Lynn Frazier from a town called Hoople. He was new to politics, and he won despite the opposition's jeering slogan, "Who in hell is Frazier? Where in hell is Hoople?" Frazier in November was the governor. The NPL also won control of the lower house of the legislature. Most of the new legislators were farmers with no political experience. Townley practically kept them prisoners in a Bismarck hotel.
We did it so the opposition couldn't work on them. They had been elected by the voters to carry out certain programs, but they didn't know what the politicians were trying to do with them. I took charge until they got so they could handle it.
They did carry out much of that program, including state grading of grain and a state guarantee of bank deposits. But a major part of their program would have to wait.
They won control of the House of Representatives, but they did not get control of the Senate, and thereby their program was basically stalled in the 1917 legislative session. So in 1918, they did the whole thing all over again. And with the momentum that they had built up, plus this continued agitation to obtain the program, they completely dominated state government in the 1918 elections. and in 1919, which is known as the Farmers' Legislature, they created a program called the New Day in North Dakota. And what that New Day was they created a North Dakota Industrial Commission to govern state-owned industries. They enacted a state bank of North Dakota. They enacted a state-owned terminal elevator and state mill. They created and authorized other state-owned industries, including state-owned hail insurance and a wide variety of other things of a definite economic impact upon the farmers.
My father was Arthur LeSueur, who was one of the wet nurses of the Nonpartisan League. He was an attorney in North Dakota. Well, he was one of the founders. They had to create laws, had to create a whole government, which was not like the government of the wheat owners. One of the great things about the Nonpartisan League, I think, when it started out, was that it wasn't a lot of big intellects or those laws are written by the farmers. They met in Bismarck in an old hotel, and they wrote those laws.
Those seeds that are planted in those days, they're in both parties now. You find some even in the conservative Republicans. Now, for example, we have a Bank of North Dakota. It was called pure socialism. We had a state mill and elevator. That was pure socialism. State being in business, that was the horrid thing to do. But you won't find any Republican or anybody else in the state want us to cancel the state mill or cancel out the state bank. So those are the vestiges of that period. And to say it had an effect, I should say it has an effect all through the political system yet today.
The state had been pretty much run by a closed group for its first 25 years. And during this time, there had been waves of immigration bringing intelligent, educated, active, and ambitious people into the state who found their means to power or their road to power blocked. And what the Nonpartisan League did, and of course this is the very definition of an insurgency, is it broke the roadblocks and thereby allowed this group of people to rise to prominence and power and to get its philosophies into public life.
In 1917, the United States entered World War I. Many of the old socialists in the League were opposed to the war. Townley himself was jailed for anti-war views. The League was savaged. It was violently attacked as pro-German. The League was then near the height of its power in North Dakota, but it was just getting started in neighboring states.
It was like fascism in Minnesota. We had the governor was head of a vigilante committee, took away land of Germans, and it was a real reactionary period.
There were some old socialists that were anti-war, said this was a poor man's fight and a rich man's war. Here in South Dakota, there's quite a few of them jailed, and they were harassed, supposed to be pro-Germans. But my father was never any pro-German, you know, and these nonpartisans weren't really.
And I knew personally friends of mine who were organizers for the Nonpartisan League who were tarred and feathered because they had dared to go out and organize farmers into the Nonpartisan League.
We had a place on Dayton Avenue in St. Paul. It was just to scrape off tar and feathers off of people who were against the war. You could die of it. Lindbergh's father was a congressman, stood up in Congress and voted against the war. They painted his house yellow, and they were almost tarred and feathered him. Farmers were having a demonstration in Red Wing to re-elect him to Congress, and the vigilantes were throwing red paint. So somebody drove away with Lindbergh in the car, Lindbergh Sr. They drove into a field, and coming down the field was a passenger train, and the engineer was a nonpartisan leaguer. So they stopped the train and picked up Lindbergh.
The rise and the abrupt fall of the Nonpartisan League was a unique chapter in American history. An agrarian protest movement did take power, and they did enact their own program. And that is about as close as an American state has ever come to experimenting with socialism. The State Bank of North Dakota, the only one of its kind in the country, is a small monument to the men who organized the League. But the war came and their revolt was crushed. The glory days of the League were over when American farmers were plunged into nearly 2 decades of depression. For most American farmers, the World War meant a bigger market and more prosperity. But when the war ended, hard times began again.
You see, food was important. Agriculture in Europe was disorganized by the war. and they bought food from us, and the farmers made money. But after the war, they got back into production over there in Europe, and our markets began to fail.
The idea was the United States was going to have to feed war-torn Europe for many years after the war. But when the war was over, why, that was it. War-torn Europe got along without anything.
Where we were getting $6 a bushel for flax, it collapsed to $1 and something. And hogs had been $24, they collapsed to $4. And so as a consequence of that, I was in a position where I was about to lose my farm.
Well, of course, when you're looking at the farm depression in the Midwest, you have to start with 1920, when corn went in May or June from about $1.70 a bushel down to 67 cents a bushel in December. And that was the beginning of real trouble, and that was the beginning of the collapse of banks in Iowa.
The big banks in the East started to call in their loans from, say, that they made the banks in Chicago. The Chicago and St. Paul banks would call in their loans made out here in Sturgis or Faith or Sorham, South Dakota, or any peer. And then they had to call in their loans from the cattlemen, you see. Then finally the time came when they came out and said, we're going to foreclose on your cattle here. And they did.
During that period, the farmers were in terrible conditions, as reflected in the fact that in 1924, 87% of the banks of South Dakota went broke in that 1 year of 1924 because of the farmers' bankruptcy.
Since the autos come, mules and horses won't sell. The farmer's land is mortgaged down. The country's gone to hell. We're up against it now. There's no use to raise a row. But of all the times I've ever seen, we're sure up against it now.
The Great Depression began in October of 1929. Much of rural America was in trouble then, but the situation became much worse. Between 1929 and 1933, farm income dropped almost 60%.
You know, land in Iowa went, I think the high was around $255 an acre, which doesn't sound very high now, in 1919, 1920, and it went down to about $65 an acre in 1933. Now, there's a lot of real tragedy in those numbers.
Well, times were pretty tough at that time. Grain was down so low, you know, that you couldn't even sell the whole crop and pay any bills. And pressure was great for to either pay or get out, as you might say.
We had about 40,000 foreclosures in the state of South Dakota. That's hard to believe. I don't know that there's another state that had that many. Our total farmers back there was over 90,000. So you see 40,000 was a pretty big slice.
It got so bad some family was eating horse meat at that time. And a lot of them had milk mush only. They had a cow or something and they had milk and they lived on milk mush. Yeah, it was tough.
I attended one sale where they were selling out everything. And here they were selling one cow after another. And the farmer's wife stood there with two little children tugging at her skirts. And she'd name every cow that was sold. Finally, she said, there goes our last cow, their means of livelihood. They were evicted and dispossessed. And that happened to many thousand of them.
farmers organized again at the bottom of the Great Depression. They called themselves this time the Farmers Holiday Association. The name was a mocking echo of the bank holidays, the days when the banks would shut down to prevent runs by depositors. The holiday wasn't a political organization, though. It was a movement. It depended on demonstrations, on strikes, on confrontation. Milo Reno was the key figure behind the holiday. He was an old populist and a leader of the Iowa Farmers Union. He was 66 years old in 1932, but he still had the gifts and the powers of a good country preacher.
He was a dairy farmer, and he, as I say, he always either rented a farm or had a farm, and his interest was in the farmer. He was a different individual than most people believe him to be. As far as motivation, it surely wasn't money, because he didn't have any money.
His whole personal tradition goes back through populism and even to the Grange, where he supposedly went to Grange lectures with his father. And he'd had a rather colorful career, not terribly successful, but he was something of a revivalist preacher, and had always had the old sort of populist image that farmers are exploited by the East, by Wall Street.
I think the most inspirational speech I ever heard him give was before the 400 Club in New York City at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And he gave the version of, hey, I'm a poor boy from Iowa trying to get someone to listen to me. I will not sell out to any of your interests whatsoever, but the main thing we're interested in is the farmer getting cost of production. He says, when you fellows sell something, you sell it for what it costs you. Instead of that, you take the farm products and use a board of trade to speculate on the farmer's fate.
At first, the Farmers' Holiday was just another name for a strike by farmers. The leaders wanted federal legislation guaranteeing the cost of production to the farmer. A poem published at the time summed up the feeling. Let's call a farmer's holiday a holiday let's hold. We'll eat our wheat and ham and eggs, and let them eat their gold.
Milo Reno and his group in Iowa started a withholding movement, hoping that if we farmers could withhold our crops from the market, maybe we could boost the prices a little bit. Well, as secretary of the Holiday Association, I didn't think we were large enough area. Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, maybe part of Nebraska, that maybe a withholding action wouldn't do the job. So I had a big meeting at Humboldt. There were thousands of farmers there. And the question came up about withholding. I was silent. I didn't say much. In walks a Catholic priest by the name of Father Goggins. Father Goggins said, if you fellows have any guts, he said, you get out there and stop this stuff from going to market for zero prices. Put on, and but I don't think you have, he said. You better put on skirts and get in the kitchen, let your wives go out. They'll do a job. And of course, next day, 14 highways into Sioux Falls were blocked. There wasn't a damn thing got through.
The master class is small, but they have lots of gall. When we unite to gain our right, if they resist, we'll use our might. There's no middle ground. This fight must be won round. To victory for liberty, our class goes marching on. Shall we always slave and work for bankers? It is outrageous, has been for ages. This earth by right belongs to toilers and not to spoilers of liberty.
The farm holiday leadership was trying to stage these things, I think, for the political impact. You know, the idea of the farm strike and so forth. It was a political device to get the legislators to pass a moratorium or to pass farm legislation that would give them cost of production. But the membership and other people got a little carried away. I mean, they put up roadblocks. They stopped cars from coming through and so forth. And what you found is that the leadership couldn't control the members.
Trucks that come with grain had to turn around everywhere. And here come a chain of them, a long chain of trucks, and they had deputies and sheriffs on there. And here stood Pete Hansen, a farmer, lone farmer with planks across the road. And they come and pointed their guns at Pete and said, "Get those planks out of there." Pete says, "You can shoot if you want to, but I'll guarantee you one thing. There won't be one of you SOBs get out of here alive. There's 1,500 men in the grove right nearby there." But here Pete stood alone on the highway, and they had to turn around with all their sheriffs and deputies.
You weren't supposed to bring anything at all to market. But there are cases where people took the seats out of cars and sat on egg cases with 30 dozen eggs and drove through the picket line sitting on those egg cases to market.
Well, here come a lady down the road with a truck, and the horns were just screaming bloody murder, see. We tried to wave her down, and she wouldn't. She just stayed right to her 60 miles an hour, that load of cattle. So they slid the old planks out, and she went right on over them. So down the road a little ways, they had about a 15-gallon barrel of gasoline, and they dumped it on the highway, and a little match stood. She went right straight through. Well, her tires went down about a mile farther down there. But they were good enough sports that anybody had the guts to do that. They'd fix the tires and give her an okay to unload.
But you see, a farmer can't live on a highway. He's got a farm too. I don't know how many days they kept that up, but they did it to prove that they could stop. You've got to picket the roads to stop stuff. You can't get voluntary agreement. They need money bad, and they'll haul grain in for nothing.
It got worse and worse. From there, it broke out up at Candiac County, you know. Where it broke out there, they had an awful active crew there. And they had put up some tents and was picketing 24 hours around the clock. And some of the young bloods down there, they wanted to go out and thought they could scare them out. So they took the guns along and went to shooting along about 10 o'clock in the evening. And they shot low too low in one tent and killed the guy.
The Farmers Holiday Association also tried to put an end to farm foreclosures. While farm strikes were in full force, the holiday launched its most famous tactic, the penny auction sale.
And the law at that time was then you could auction everything off, and whatever you received from auctioning it off, that satisfied the debt. Well, now let's say we have a $3,000 debt on equipment. If we can get all the farm holiday people together and we can go there and bid pennies, they had a rule, nothing more than a nickel. And if somebody bid more than a penny or a nickel, he was kind of led away. Two big guys would come over and kind of drag him out of the way. Or if he didn't understand, they just knock him down and keep him out of the way. And then at the end of the day, you settle up. Well, the bank finds out it has collected $12.32. The debt is $3,000. They've been better off not to hold a sale in the first place. And they didn't hold many of these penny auction sales, but it was a very dramatic technique. It got a lot of publicity, and it discouraged foreclosures.
Millbank was probably the most famous one. Crowds met there, big numbers, and here comes the sheriff with a dozen deputies all armed to enforce the law.
And I want you to know, he said, that we will brook no interference with this sale. So the auctioneer started selling. He said, "How much am I offering for this binder, boys?" And one of the farmers on the bidding committee said 5 cents. And somebody standing up next to the binder said $5. So the black guy, the name was, I forgot his name now, walked up to him and said, "Are you authorized to bid by the Holiday Association?" He said, "Hell no. Here's my authority to bid," and he opened his coat to show a deputy sheriff's star.
And one of them happened to fire a gun. He didn't hurt anybody, but the farmers disarmed them so fast they didn't know what happened. They yanked their belts off without unbuckling them and told them to get out of there.
While this melee was taking place, the auctioneer ran, and so the sheriff said, "Boys, what are we going to do now? We haven't got no auctioneer." And one of the farmers grabbed the sheriff by the arm and he shook him. He said, "Sheriff, you're going to learn how to be an auctioneer right this afternoon. Get him with that binder." And the old sheriff sat down the binder and he said, "How much am I offering for this binder, boys?" And the same bidder said, 5 cents. Another guy waited a minute or so and he said, oh, let's make the old sheriff feel good. He said, I bid 6 cents for that binder.
I think the estimate was that 25,000 Iowa farms, 1 in 9, went through foreclosure, and some of them more than once. Well, just imagine 25,000 families losing their homes. That's quite almost a justification, if there is any justification for that type of thing. You can understand it with the humanness and the tragedy that's involved in that.
Rage and violence in rural America was part of the background of the presidential election campaign of 1932. Even in his home state of Iowa, President Herbert Hoover was overwhelmingly rejected by voters. President-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt promised a new deal for Americans.
When he was inaugurated, he came direct to our capital by special train. And as a senator, I had the privilege of an hour's visit with FDR. That was the thrill of my lifetime. He said, I will promise you right here, you're going to get action now. I'm calling Congress into session immediately.
Roosevelt had just become president when 600 angry farmers descended on a town to stop a forced land sale. The place was Primgar in northwestern Iowa. Protesting farmers had been beaten by armed deputies, but this time they fought back. They forced the sheriff and his deputies to kiss the flag. Then they went on to the nearby town of Lamars, and they stormed the courtroom of a judge named Charles Bradley.
They had black hats on, these old-fashioned black hats, and they were smoking. And Judge Bradley was on the bench. And Cope come along with us from Primgar, and he'd been clubbed over the head so that he had a bloody handkerchief wrapped around his brow. And he walked up to the judge and he said, Your Honor, I respectfully ask you not to sign any foreclosures. And he never even answered Cope. He said, hoodlums, stop smoking and take your hats off in my courtroom.
He had about 15 mortgage foreclosures on his desk. And the judge said, well, he can't make a promise like that because that's what he's a judge for.
One guy took him by one arm, the other guy took him by the other arm, and the other by his coat. Here, now will you stop signing foreclosures? And he says, no.
And they punched the judge on one side and then punched him on the other and finally picked him up bodily and took him out of the courtroom.
Later on, I saw him in the truck when they started out of town and they had a rope around his neck.
There was allegedly a dispute whether they should try to hang him or put the rope around him and drag him behind a car.
And Sears went up to Bradley to help him. And the holiday boy says, you get out of here or we'll knock your block off. So Sears came back and I said, Sears, let's get out of here. I don't want to have anything to do with this. So we went home.
And then they started to tighten the rope around his neck. And Krause told me, he said, this guy had more courage and more guts than anybody he ever saw. He said, when his feet were about to come off the ground, and still he wouldn't give up. And Cope said that he tore the bandage off the guy's eye, off the judge's eyes, and said, let him go. He's had enough.
Iowa Governor Herring declared martial law. State militia moved into Lamars and rounded up the leaders of the farmers' movement. They were held for trial, and after that, further farm sales were conducted at Bayonet Point.
I think he called Governor Herring, if I remember correctly, and told him, hey, don't shoot them. They only got pitchforks.
Reno always insisted that he was not in favor of violence, that that was not his cup of tea. But the violence was a practical result.
I think that was a turning point when he realized that through many of the counties in Iowa that the farm holiday meetings were infiltrated with a bunch of hotheads that got out of hand and took things into their own hands.
most of these people had never done anything like this before. I mean, you'd had a few people who'd been active in the nonpartisan league or something like that, you know, but the mass of people out there on the steps and so forth, it's probably the first time they'd ever done anything like this or gone to a demonstration. Now, there was some communist activity and some communist infiltration in the holiday. But what these individuals who turned out for the demonstrations and supported the holiday wanted was to keep their farm.
Well, you've got to remember that it wasn't just the debtors who were in trouble as a result of this. They got their money in the first place in good faith loans from insurance companies and banks. And you can't very well blame the insurance companies or the banks from trying to get their money, because after all said and done, what is an insurance company but the money of its policyholders? And what is a bank but the money of its depositors?
Within 3 months of taking office, Roosevelt had put together emergency programs offering hope to millions of Americans. But some farmers were still not satisfied. The holiday leadership continued to push for cost of production, and there's still debate over how much influence they had.
And then in the summer and fall of '33, when prices, not farm prices, but prices of goods that farmers purchased, seemed to be increasing under the NRA faster than farm prices were increasing. Reno is ready to call another strike.
And John Bush, he said, now is the time to strike. He said, and he took 5 of the governors from the Northwest states here, Dakota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota, and went to Washington to see Roosevelt. Got there and Bush called him and said, we'd like to have an audience with him. He said, sure, sure, he said, and he came right on. So he introduced them to his crowd and told them the purpose that they were there. And he laid out the farm program that they wanted him to put into effect, see. And after he had told him all about it, why, he says, I'm sorry, he says, I'll have to consult my advisors. He said, fine. They said, we'll just wait. So they waited 1 day, and they waited 2 days, and they waited 3 days. That time, old Bill from North Dakota, governor, he was so damn mad. And he called up there and said they want an audience with him right away. So he said, Mr. President, he says, what did you decide? He says, I'm sorry, we can't do anything for you. Well, he used pretty tough language. He went over and slammed his fist right under his nose. He said, we just kicked one son of a bitch out of here and we can do it again. He said, oh, Roosevelt got back in his chair and he looked them all over. He was shocked, see. Finally, he says, I'll see what I can do, fellas, he said.
The New Deal farm program was not the cost of production program called for by Reno in the holiday. It was a more conservative approach, guaranteeing the ratio of farm prices to farm costs that prevailed from 1910 to 1914, the parity years. Opposition to that parity program surfaced immediately.
He thought the support price was a substitute for cost of production. He knew that they'd never get cost of production as long as they had the marketing system and the distribution system the way it was. He was sure that there is no way that it would be possible to ever get cost of production for the farmers. His big argument was that on any subsidy that you give, that the government gives, that the large corporations and everything will benefit far more than the average farmer will, and he thinks that he thought at that time, and he called one of his papers to Roosevelt at that time, said that a maximum amount should be paid to any farm, and any corporation that is using as a tax write-off should not be entitled to any benefits whatsoever.
Credit agencies were set up. We've been paying pretty high interest rates, and I was appointed state director of the Farm Security Administration. We made loans only to farmers, loans as low as 2.5% and 3%. That's different than now.
I have publicly asked that the foreclosure on farms and chattels and homes be delayed until every mortgagor in the country has had full opportunity to take advantage of federal credit. And I make the further request that if there is any family in the United States about to lose its home or its farm,
that family should telegraph at once, either to the Farm Credit Administration or the Home Loan Corporation in Washington, requesting their help. I do not hesitate to say that although the prices of many products of the farm have gone up, and although many farm families are better off than they were last year, I am not satisfied.
Most farm revolt did end with the coming of the New Deal programs, even though there were isolated holiday efforts until the late 1930s.
After a year of FDR, the Holiday Association evaporated. But we didn't even meet anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That was just an emergency organization.
In other words, there was no need for the demonstrations anymore because of the legislation. And I think this is the American way of doing it.
The farm economy was radically changed by the Great Depression. Many farmers had to leave the land. The survivors benefited from the programs of the New Deal: low-interest loans, commodity price supports, cash incentives not to plant acreage. Franklin Roosevelt had adopted some of the old populist ideas. The government and the farmers were finally in business together. There was a lot of controversy about that, and there still is.
Every one of us would like to say, let's just get the government out of agriculture, because we're fully aware that most of the things that's been done to hurt agriculture in the last 10, 15 years has been done by government, whether it's been embargoes or economic sanctions or export restrictions or beef freezes. This has been done by government.
The government is involved in nearly everything, and whether we can survive on a free enterprise system, we all say this, that we wish it could work, but we question very much as to whether we can survive without some help.
If you measure government farm policy from almost any point of view, you have to say it's a relative failure. It hasn't done very well in supply management. It hasn't done very well in income maintenance. Probably has resulted in some lower food costs for consumers, but at a very high price.
I think farmers have a social problem. It's a social problem just like racism and sexism and many other inequities in our society. It's a social problem, and we need the government to step in and see that fairness is brought to the marketplace. And that's the reason that I support a government sponsored farm price support program, which puts a minimum price under farm commodities.
I don't know that the government should, as a policy, totally withdraw, but I would personally prefer it to what we have, if that was the choice. We've known for a long time that the top 5% of our farm population reaps a totally disproportionate amount of program benefits.
Perhaps the greatest difficulty that we've faced is we've had a great instability in agricultural programs. We have tight controls one year to no controls the next year. And that's created a crisis-to-crisis kind of psychology in farm policy. And that's hurt the family farmer.
Well, it all depends on Washington. Prices are still made in Washington. And if we get a farm bill that enables the family farmer to exist, he'll exist. If we have a free enterprise across the board with no farm supports or no farm legislation, then the economic battle will take its toll. That's all there is to it.
Thomas Jefferson wanted farming to be the American way of life, but it became a business instead. Between 1930 and 1980, 35 million Americans left the farm for the city. When the farm protest began 100 years ago, 2 out of 3 Americans lived in rural areas. Now less than 3% of us are farmers, and there are more and more foreclosures every day. The farmers were right to be angry, but the way things are going, there soon may not be enough of them left to organize a protest.
Agriculture is in worse shape now than it ever was in the history of mankind, you know.
Why is that?
Because it's so heavily mortgaged, you know. Farmers' home, the latest figures, that if you can get them, would show that the that the price of land has already fallen, the price of cattle and crop failures now, and the price of everything, wheat, corn, beans, is down. And so that there's just, the country's on the verge of mass foreclosures all over. And who's going to be the buyer?
A lot of the issues we're facing are the very same that people have faced a century ago. The consolidation of control over farmland, depression level economic problems, problems with people feeling totally powerless to deal with the situation, same kinds of problems that we face with lenders today that were faced back in the 30s or back in the late 19th century, with lenders taking precipitous kinds of actions against people. And therefore, I think since the problems are pretty much similar, that we have to look back to those prior movements to figure out exactly where they were right, where they might have gone astray, so that we can be hopefully a little bit more successful this time.
The holiday movement, for example, brought reform to agriculture. And we've had, some pretty decent years since that time. And what we're simply saying again is we have a tendency to repeat history's past mistakes. I think the economist Elliot Janeway said it's most unfortunate this nation has not recognized that the crash of 1929 was spawned in the cornfields of Iowa and the wheat fields of Kansas. So as we have forgotten history's past mistakes and we begin to go back to some of those policies that brought us to the last Great Depression, somebody or something needs to remind our government and our government's leaders that we need to redirect our direction out here, and begin to form a structural policy that avoids the sort of disaster that we experienced in the Great Depression.
The prices that the farmers receive has got to go up. You can't cure this problem by lending the farmers more and more money. It's going to collapse on itself. Farmers have got to get a fair rate of return for their product, and not in the form of government handouts, but prices.
Well, the best way for the farmer to respond to that is to organize and to put a price on his production, the same as any other successful industry does. And certainly collective bargaining is an area that, while it hasn't been used in farmers, it has been by farmers, it has been used by many other groups of people. And any group that has used it, it has worked for them, and there's no reason why it will not work for farmers.
The farmer as a consumer is much more important than he is as a voter. And the more people we have out on the farm, the more consumption you get, the more vital your rural businesses become. And if you believe, as I do, that our basic industrial base is never going to be what it was, our basic industries are in trouble because they're old and there's not a reason for them to exist, then we have to look at other forms of employment. And I see agriculture as one of the best ways to employ people. Not everybody is going to be a computer programmer, despite what we've been hearing.
The structure issue is perhaps the most important issue that farmers are going to have to deal with, together with price support levels, those kinds of things. But in essence, we still come back as have an opportunity yet to make a choice of whether we're going to have a landed gentry in this country or corporate agriculture, can't tell the difference really between the two, or a family farm system. And that's the choice that this country is going to be making in the next 10 years.
We're all very poor people. We never want to admit that we have anything. And yet in agriculture, much of the land that is sold is bought by a neighbor, bought by other agricultural people. It doesn't go out of existence. It doesn't accrue to the big corporate operation as much criticism. We do have some examples of that in Nebraska, and it troubles all of us. And yet those entities, those operations, have to show some profit for somebody, someplace. And it takes management to put that into sequence. And even though we have a problem with it, this is a part of the freedoms that I, as one, would fight to my dying breath to defend, even though I don't agree with it.
And I don't think we want to forget that agriculture is primarily a commodity producer. We have to keep our costs in line or we're going to fall by the wayside. That's been going on for 5,000 years. The high-cost producers always are the first to fall by the wayside. And I think that we in agriculture need to concentrate on lowering those unit costs of production and never, ever give up on that. Keep concentrating on efficiency, on lowering those costs in such a way that we will survive and we will be the ones that are agricultural producers next generation. Now, that's a harsh way to put that, but I think as you look at history, you'll find that that's the way agriculture has operated for the last 5,000 years, since at least biblical times.
But there's more to this country than just complete efficiency. There's more to it than that. Farming is a way of life. They built these plains, they built this whole country, built the churches, they built the schools. So many people can trace their ancestry back to this area. This was a wholesome area. This was a good place to live. And I don't think we should lose it. It's entirely possible you can run this whole state with one factory farm. What does that mean? What does that mean about the building of our youth? What does it teach about the moral lessons? What about things of that nature that can't be measured with dollar signs? It's out here. And I would hate to see it leave.
When the farmer comes to town with his wagon broken down, oh, the farmer is the man that feeds them all. If you'll only look and see, I think that you'll agree that the farmer is the man that feeds them all. The farmer is the man, the farmer is the man. He lives on his credit till the fall. And then they take him by the hand and they lead him from the land. And the middleman's the one that gets it all. When the banker says he's broke and the merchant's up in smoke, they forget that it's the farmer feeds them all. It would put them to the test if the farmer took a rest. Then they'd know that it's the farmer feeds them all. Ah, the farmer is the man, the farmer is the man. He lives on his credit till the fall. And his pants are wearing thin, his condition, it's a sin. We forget that he's the man that feeds us all.